Welcome to the Swim Swam podcast. I'm your host, Coleman Hodges. Joining us today, 60-year-old triathlete and Ironman living with type 1 diabetes, who, after completing a 2,800-mile run across America last year to raise awareness for diabetes, is about to perform a new feat, a 10K swim around Key West on June 18th. Here to tell us more about everything I just said, we are sitting down today with Don Muchow. Don, how's it going?
Not bad. It's getting warm here in Dallas and getting ready for it to get warmer down in Key West.
Start with the swim. It's happening on June 18th. 10K around Key West. What made that the specifics of this swim? Why 10K? Why in Key West?
The Key West piece I'll address first. When I finished the run that I did across the U.S., I was standing on the East Coast with my feet in the water, staring out into the ocean, and somebody said, "Well, surely you're not going to swim across that." And I said, "Yeah, I don't think so." And I was thinking about a friend of mine who had completed the full 12.5-mile swim around the island of Key West. And I had in mind a goal to do that at some point. And I had trained throughout this summer to do the full 12.5. And at the last minute, we pulled back to the 10K because my training times were literally minutes from catching the reversing tide. So sometimes you have to be practical and pull your goals back just a little bit. But I'd say I'm about 90% trained for at least barely completing the full swim around the island. But as we had talked about in the green room a few moments ago, I'm a creature of caution. So we're going to do the 10K this year and the 12.5-mile next year.
It's interesting you bring up the tides, right? Because as swimmers, that's not something we would ever think about because open water is obviously just a very different beast. So tell me a little bit more about that. You know, you have to plan for those tides coming in and out. And what are the times that you need to hold, or what is the pace that you have to, be continuously going to miss those tides or to hit those tides at the right time?
To answer your last question first, I need to be able to average about a 2.5-minute 100 over 12.5 miles in order to beat the tides. There's a little bit of wiggle room. Basically, there are 3 checkpoints around the island that are tide-based. Tides tend to change one direction or another about every 4 hours or so. And so the first big checkpoint is on the northwest side of the island at the cut under Fleming Key Bridge. And it's a slow change, but if you don't make that first 5 miles within 2.5 hours, the tides start to slowly push you back out, and it gets difficult to make the remaining 4 or 5 miles to the next checkpoint. The final checkpoint, I think I said there were 3. I can't remember where the second one is, but the last checkpoint basically is coming under the bridge at Cow Key on the east side of the island. And you need to make it there within 8 hours of the beginning of the race. Because it will push you so hard you won't be able to finish. You mentioned open water swimming and not having to think too much about tides. My own experience has been that the things that are most annoying with ocean swimming, as opposed to just going out in a lake or doing an Ironman, is that nature does not forgive the slow people. And I'm the slow people. So if it's a choppy day or you've got rollers or the tides are against you, you need to build in a buffer of toughness or speed that you can summon to get past that. Otherwise, it does not go that well. I swam fast enough to complete an Ironman. And to be honest, the swim limits on that are fairly generous. One thing I've been learning as I've moved from running, which I knew well, to swimming, which I've learned mostly. I could swim when I did the Ironman, but I've had to learn how to swim faster and how to beat target times and that sort of thing, which has made it a much more serious pursuit. And I'm learning just now that there are things I can squeeze out of my technique, out of my sighting and so forth, to speed up a bit. Fundamentally, in the back of my mind is always the question, well, I'm approaching 61 now. How much faster am I going to get, or is age going to catch up and make me slower? So one of the reasons I want to make sure that I do the Key West swim is that I can do it while I have the physical capability to do it. I'm not an elite swimmer. I'm an ordinary Joe who dreams of doing big things, and I have to deal with that.
So we also mentioned that you have to deal with type 1 diabetes. Yes. You did this 2,800 mile run to raise awareness for diabetes. Fair to say that this swim is for the same pursuit, but just, give us a little more in-depth answer of the why, why this swim? What do you hope to gain out of it?
Well, part of what I hope to gain is to explore what is possible with type 1. One of the special challenges, and I blogged about it in an article on my blog called The No Wake Zone, is that people like me are concerned about low blood sugars, which can happen overnight after exercise or after any kind of exertion, stressful situation. Stress gets removed, you stop running or swimming or what have you, and your blood sugar drops. And that's something we all fear. There's something called dead in bed syndrome that happens to a handful of type 1s every year who, for various reasons, either didn't anticipate or just bad timing, but they died in their sleep. So for me, part of the challenge is to find out what folks with type 1 can do, but to do it safely. One of the reasons we pulled back to the 10K was because on my last 12 and a half mile swim at the local lake here, I put on a big push to finish in what would have been adequate time for Key West, only to notice that the extra effort to exercise made my blood sugar drop precipitously. And I came out of the water sort of skating with a low-ish blood sugar. And these are things I have to plan for. Now, one thing that has helped a lot, one of my technology partners is Dexcom, and I use their sensor. It's called the G6. And it will advise me what my blood sugar is. I actually get those numbers on my Garmin watch through a widget that Garmin provides for Dexcom. And I can see what my blood sugar is when I'm swimming, but I still have to deal with whatever it's doing. And sometimes what that means is doing things like tucking maple syrup gels under the legs of my jammers so that I don't get caught 150 meters from shore with no way to treat a low blood sugar. So, you learn little things along the way. And part of the goal for me is to find out what is possible for someone with type 1 to do safely in the water that has a certain degree of epic to it, because I'm aware that there are people who follow me who want to know, well, what did you learn? We're all kind of cheating off each other's papers, and part of my goal is to pay it forward. Anything I learn about what's special about type 1 and doing certain kinds of physical activity that require extra attention, because frankly, there's not a large body of knowledge out there right now.
Yeah, I have a friend, a close friend who has type 1 diabetes, and just talking about it with him, I didn't realize that it was such a constant thing, right? And I'm sure especially for an athlete, but it's something that you don't just take a pill for or eat a specific thing every X amount of hours or every X amount of days. It's something that you always have to be conscious of, which sounds like a lot. It sounds exhausting, frankly, to me. Just being a normal person, right? But for you, on top of that, for you being a fairly extreme athlete, triathlete, Ironmans, and these long runs and swims, it just adds another layer to it. So I'm curious now we get, into your background and your history. Were you an athlete prior to learning that you're discovering you had type 1 diabetes, or were you just a normal everyday person? And then after diabetes, that changed things for you?
I was diagnosed at the age of, I believe it was 11 in 1972. And of course, I was a very curious, playful kid, and that made things challenging because I didn't truly comprehend what was going on with my body. And my parents sort of took on that role of watching out for me. But going outside and playing, of course, when glucose meters would not be invented for another 8 years, meant that they either had to be super careful to notice what was going on, or I had to live a fairly rigid, regimented life. And really the only practical option for folks like me at the time was to live a rigid, regimented life. And I actually had my doctor at the time basically said, only way we can test your blood sugar is if you come into the hospital and we get out our glucose meters, because it was hospital type technology back then. So we would recommend that you actually don't exercise. You're a young kid. You get your future ahead of you. Who knows what 10 years will bring, but don't do stuff that's going to mess up your blood sugar. And of course, I stopped. And fast forward the clock, another 30 years or so. I think it was 32 years that I had gone basically avoiding exercise. And I had an epiphany one day. I've been walking up the stairs, and I had to stop and catch my breath. And I thought, man, how did I get here? And that year, it was 2004, weighing in just shy of 220 pounds and being physically inactive for the last 3 decades, I decided, I need to do something different. And I started exercising in a very, baby steps, bite-sized kind of way. And I'd already signed up for my first 5K when I had an appointment with my retina specialist, who diagnosed me with proliferative retinopathy. By the way, that tune you're hearing there is my tandem insulin pump, the little number on the top there. I just had lunch a little while ago. So I think it says 205. The Dexcom is working that down for me, telling the pump to dose a little bit, but you might hear that tone off and on again. But anyway, I'd already signed up for a 5K, and I got this diagnosis of proliferative retinopathy. And the treatment at the time for it was to basically fire a laser into my eye and cauterize some leaking blood vessels, which left me with a blind spot. And I said, okay, well, thanks. I appreciate that. I can't see out of that spot anymore. What's going on? He said, well, you'll never be able to see out of that spot. We burned the retina behind it. And I was like, I thought this was supposed to prevent me from going blind. And he's like, not if you keep getting these treatments. And at that point, I made a decision that I wasn't going to turn back. I had to be physically active. Now, keep in mind, I told you earlier that many of us are scared of that because low blood sugars in the middle of the night can be a very risky business. But I thought, what, the risks of blindness and circulatory problems are at this point equal to the risks of low blood sugars in the middle of the night. I've got to pick my evil. And I decided, what, it's probably better to be active. So I wasn't physically active until 2004. I mostly did runs and marathons and so forth. And some friends of mine who are also type 1 got me involved in triathlons in 2013. And of course, I didn't know how to swim. So part of the thing with Key West for me is finding my biggest demon, the thing I knew the least, and trying to get good at it. That tends to be the way I think. I focus on my weaknesses and try to make those areas where I'm a bit stronger. Perhaps it would have been easier for me if I had been an elite swimmer, one of these people that comes in at a minute or so per 100 yards, but that's not me. I want to do things that are hard for ordinary Joes and figure out how to do them safely for type 1 ordinary Joes.
So why? So my mom runs ultra marathons. And
Good for her, by the way.
Good for her. I agree. We actually, her and I ran both of our first marathon together. We trained for it, and I had just finished swimming in high school at the time. And so I was like, okay, I've always liked running. Let's do it. And we both did a marathon. And at the end of it, she was like, I want to go further. I love this. This is great. And I finished and I was like, I'm good. I never need to run that far again in my life. I finished it. I'm proud. I met my time goal that I had for myself, but like, I'm good. So I'm curious, you had never worked out before, or, 3 decades of stagnant, normal life behavior. And then you start running, right? You sign up for a 5K. Describe to me the bug you catch to go from 5K to marathons to triathlons to Ironman.
I probably got the first taste of the bug after I finished the 5K. It took me about an hour, and I knew that was not a good time. But when I got done with it, I had the feeling that I had done something for myself that amazed me. And I knew it was healthy, and I felt a sense of victory at having done the hard thing that people always dread going to do. I ran marathons for the next several years after doing my first half in 2009. And I could see myself getting a little faster, getting a little smarter. And I went through all the challenges that people go through with, getting black toenails that fall off and all those other things. But I noticed I wasn't really getting any faster. And I got the ultra bug, and I'm trying to remember, I think 2013 was the year that I started doing triathlons and ultras. And there was the Cowtown Marathon, which is in Fort Worth, had a 50K race. And I decided to sign up for it because it was only five miles or so longer than a marathon. And I figured, okay, well, I can run 26, I can run another 5. And when I got to 5 miles from the ultra finish, there was probably about 1.5 miles from the marathon finish. There was this turnoff where about 300 of us went and continued running for another 5 miles. And everyone else peeled off for their victory lap, or whatever you want to call it. And there was something about the fact that it was a smaller group of people. We all knew that we were doing something more than a marathon. And even though it wasn't that much more than a marathon, it felt special. The vibe was different. The flat Coke and chocolate-covered pretzels at the turnaround sort of made me feel like I was somebody special. So I started to sort of pivot to doing things that were longer distances, where I knew as long as I had time and they didn't stop the clock on me, I could keep going. 2017 was a big year for me. I had been doing some ultras and some quadruple marathons just to kind of wet my whistle for larger things. And I believe it was 2016. No, 2017. I did my 2016. I did my second quad and actually came in third because there's so few people signed up for all four of them. And most of the people sort of thought of it as a walk in the park, and I felt competitive about it. And I was running with a friend of mine.
To clarify, quad marathon meaning 4 marathons in 4 days?
Yeah, 4 in 4 days.
Okay.
So you have a full night to sleep, to get a massage, eat plenty of protein, whatever. And I sort of amazed myself, and I thought, okay, well, if I can do this, wonder what I can do. And I signed up for a 100-mile race, which was well beyond what I thought I could do. I trained like crazy for it. And I think I finished second from last. I watched people drop off behind me. It's a steady stream of DNFs, did not finishes. And, but I thought, you know what, whether I'm the last guy or not, I'm doing this. And there was a point in the summer of 2017 where I thought, holy crap, I've done quadruple marathons. I've done 100-mile races. Maybe I have more that I'm capable of. And after a lot of thinking, I signed up to do Ironman Texas. I'd actually DNF'd on a couple of half irons because of things I did not know. And
such as?
That you need to fix a flat. And if you're going to commit to putting gator skins, you better be ready to blow them full of slime, because there's no way you're going to get those things on and off in time to finish the bike portion if you blow a tire. That's the trade-off you make. And I stayed with the gator skins. I put some fix a flat in my bike bag, and I never blew another tire. So when I did Ironman Texas, to me at that point, the swim was not the scariest part. I was definitely not a super great swimmer, but I felt confident in self-rescue and so forth. But finishing the bike without blowing a tire was always what was in the back of my mind. Now, you want to talk about swim-related stuff that kind of puts a bit of a swallow in your throat. The previous year, I had done an off-brand 140.6, and it was on a large lake in, it was either Wisconsin or Minnesota. It was the Hits Waconia 140.6. So
what do you mean an off-brand? Like it wasn't sponsored by the Ironman brand?
Yeah, it wasn't an official Ironman. It was every so often somebody has a 140.6 out there. I'm not repping for Ironman, but I will say that their support for the events is second to none.
Okay.
And this one, they had a couple of boats out in the water doing the best they could to monitor situations and make sure no one got in danger. But the weather was not cooperating that day. And for a lake, we had 2-foot chop thereabouts, definitely more than 1.5 feet. And when I got out there, I got about 400 meters in and aspirated water pretty thoroughly twice. And there was a rescue vessel maybe 15, 20 yards away from me. And I signaled for pickup because I thought there's no way I'm making 2.5 miles in these conditions. And they sped off because another guy was already face down in the water and not moving. And so I thought, the smart thing to do here is to turn around and self-rescue. Yes, it's 400 meters, but it's 400 meters only. It's going to be 500 if I don't turn around. So I got real careful about rough water after that. And for me, I didn't return to that until this past summer when I was training for Key West and the swim around the island. And I thought, we could have choppy water. It's the ocean, wind blows all the time. And I went down to Miami and trained in yellow flag conditions. And of course, this was on my own terms, just off the shore. Kayaker with me, safety buoy trailing along behind me. And it wasn't bad. And that was when I learned that there's a difference between lakes and 2-foot chop and 2-foot swells and periodicity in the waves. And to be honest, I prefer the ocean at this point because the waves are predictable for the most part. So you learn things, I guess.
Yeah, it's, I mean, especially racing the kind of races and mileage that it sounds like you're putting on your body. I mean, I know talking to my mom, you learn things every single race, right? And you kind of get that experience under your belt more and more. And so I would think I want to ask you about this 2,800 mile run that you did last year, specifically to raise awareness for type 1 diabetes. Can you just tell me a little bit about that experience, what you learned from that, and the impact on the diabetic community you feel like you were able to have from that?
Yeah, first of all, in terms of what I learned from it, and then talking a bit about the impact. When I first started doing things like quads and 100 milers, the challenge was primarily physical. Even with 100 milers, it was no worse than pulling an all-nighter in college. Your all-nighter was running, but it was just an all-nighter. It was psychologically harder when I did my first 200-mile run. And when I did, so for the US run, I practiced on Iowa first and then on Texas. Iowa is 340 miles across. And there was actually a relay race that I did as their first solo runner back in 2018. And really for 100 milers and 200 milers and 300 milers, it's mostly a psychological toll, but physical up to, I'd say, about 150 miles. But then after that, it starts to be this game of, oh, we're going too slow. Let's skip the next sleep stop. Or I don't have time to eat. Just give me some Oreos and let me keep running. And you play this math game with yourself that you can sacrifice things that are actually necessary in order to finish on time. Running across Iowa, we hit 4 thunderstorms that took about 16 hours off our estimated finish time. And of course, we had to make those back up. I had originally budgeted about 45 miles a day, I think, and we had to jack it up to 55 miles a day because we lost, entire half days due to hailstorms and things. That part of the country really is, the house they used to film Twister is on the route. So it was the relay was Relay Iowa, and it basically runs right across the state from Sioux City to Dubuque. When I got to running Texas and then the US, it kind of went beyond what I would call simple test of endurance or mental toughness to being more emotionally and spiritually taxing. Your mind starts doubting whether you did a smart thing, whether you can keep doing it. And then we took rest days every 10 days on both of those. On Texas, it was involuntary. I didn't realize I needed to be taking rest days, but I was not in good condition after 10 days and had to take a pause. And then we had a weather pause the next 10 days. But you learn that it's emotionally taxing and to a certain extent spiritually taxing as well. So I guess going back to the question about what did I learn that I could share, that I felt the impact was with the type 1 community. I was really pleased on the US run that we had followed the advice of a 7-year-old friend of mine who heard I was running from coast to coast and managed to conceive of that only as Disneyland to Disney World. And when we shared that story with the media,
was that the route, Disneyland to Disney World?
Yeah, we stuck on a bit on the front and the back of it so that I got wet feet in both oceans. But the plan was, from the moment he shared that idea with me, to run from Disneyland to Disney World. We did some research and found out that no one had ever done that before. So we were pretty sure that it was a first. Now, there's a lot of side story I could go into about COVID and having to pause for my dad's funeral. But what I learned was that you get your 3 minutes of attention from national news media, and you need to get your story straight and what it is that you want to share. And one of the things I learned very quickly was that I had to focus the narrative on what was possible, not what the challenges were I was facing, but the fact that they were overcomable with patience and diligence and a little bit of technical help from some of the diabetes gear that I had. And that was probably the biggest lesson to me, was that, we're all in this learning together. It's all a fairly tightly knit community with people living with type 1, but sharing that story with people who aren't living with it, who don't understand why it's so challenging to do a long swim or an Ironman or 100-miler or run across the country with type 1, that it's a little bit harder. It's something you have to do with one hand tied behind your back, testing your blood sugar. And, but it's still possible. And I feel like that was the biggest side benefit of it, was that it stopped being my story and it started being a story about what people were capable of, even when they sort of had their hands tied behind their back.
So I love this narrative. I'm really excited to follow you through this swim in Key West. It's happening in just a few days. We're down to about 2 minutes, but Don, thank you for joining us. Do you have any parting thoughts for our audience before we sign off today?
Yeah, if you're living with type 1, don't start by assuming there are things you can't do. There are lots of people out there who can share info, who can help, who can share their lessons with you. I learned most of what I know about type 1 in swimming from a type 1 friend who had previously done the Key West swim. In fact, if I finish the full next year, I will be the 4th person with type 1, not the 1st. So there are people out there you can learn from. Set your sights high, be careful, be planful. And if you're someone not living with the disease, understand that this is an autoimmune disorder that none of us asked for. It still needs a cure. It's made better by insulin and by things like the Dexcom and the pump that I have, tandem pump. But it's not a cure. And until we have a cure, we need some understanding about what people like us are facing, and maybe some advocacy on behalf of getting the word out there that the challenges are real. Things like job discrimination are still present based on health conditions. And yet we managed to exceed expectations.
You've been listening to the Swim Swam podcast. Stay tuned for new episodes every week. You can take Swim Swam podcast on the go by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Look for links in the description below, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos as well.